Welcome everybody. This is, I'm doing the cloud recording. Oh, well, we'll figure it out. This is a ad hoc meeting to talk about creating a contributor site that is a more, hey Paris, we're going to talk about creating a community-facing site, it came from a naive email that I sent that kicked the hornet's nest a little bit, and so hopefully we can figure out what everybody's doing and find ways to join forces. And I'll probably post this to YouTube with an unlisted link and share it with folks as appropriate, so that everybody can see what's going on. Great. Oh, and then Jared, there you are. Awesome. I think we definitely have quorum now. Well, since I precipitated. Did I hear somebody? Was it me echoing back at myself? I don't know. So since I precipitated this, I'll go ahead and get started and give you sort of where I'm coming from with this. So for a while now, we've been talking about this KEP idea, the Kubernetes enhancement proposal. And a big part of what we wanted to do with the KEP process is collect more data, more metadata about the different proposals. Give them each a number, be able to sort of easily cross-link these things, a little bit like RFCs, understand sort of the, which SIGs they apply to, with the idea that we can, use that metadata to do slicing and dicing and analysis and filtered views and colored things based on the state that they're in, that type of thing. And some of this is inspired by, say, the PEP process in the Python world, where you can actually go and look at all these proposals and figure out broad categories. And I think we can take it even further than what the Python folks do there. So that was the idea. And there's a chicken and egg problem here of, we want to incentivize people to start writing KEPs. And how do we actually, it's extra process, but we want to return some value for that process. Some of that value is making the stuff more accessible to the rest of the community. And some of that is being able to clearly build connections where it's difficult to do that right now. And so as we add value, we end up motivating more process. So that's the idea around that. This has been primarily driven out of SIG architecture. And as we look to roll this out further, I wanted to start building some of the scaffolding so that we can add some value based on that metadata. We can start seeing how all this stuff is going to come together. So I'm like, hey, I'm going to create a KEP site. How hard could it be? I'll just scrape the markdown, render it, slice and dice it. And then that quickly turned into a discussion of like, well, there's other stuff that we want to have that's community facing, not necessarily externally facing, including stuff like the contributor guide. And I'm sure there's going to be a bunch of other stuff. And so I sent the mail out saying like, hey, what's going on? How can we get started on this stuff? And apparently there's a lot going on, but we haven't been communicating super well. So I'd love to hear what other folks are working on in this space.
I can add a few words about the contributor website and how we at CNC have total support of these ideas. So I just would like to highlight it in parallel with starting investigating the ability to develop the same website, the same set of website for all our CNCF projects, and having one for Kubernetes, and with Kubernetes as the biggest project and the most fast-growing project. It would be a great idea. So if we're speaking about some like contributor website where can everybody find any valuable information about how to join CNCF and
Oh, Ihor, you're back, or at least you're back for me now. You froze there for a while, and we couldn't see you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we
Yeah.
can you say what you were saying again and just repeat yourself? You
Okay, yeah.
started saying what you're working on and then you froze, and so.
Okay. I've been just speaking about the contributor website, the original proposal that Joe put into the mailing thread. So at CNCF, we're totally supportive of this idea. In parallel, we had a similar idea with having the contributor website for all our CNCF projects to be represented at something like contribute.cncf.io. So having the similar effort for Kubernetes is absolutely welcome.
So are you imagining that this would be scaffolding that would be sort of shared across all CNCF projects, or it would be a single site or a per project site? I'm trying to wrap my head around sort of what the idea here is.
Before I heard your idea, Joe, our idea was to host the website using GitHub tools like GitHub Pages under CNCF organization. Everything.
Ihor broke up again.
Ihor, you broke up again. You're frozen again. The internet's great when it works. You froze there again, Ihor.
Ihor, you might want to shut off your video. I think that might help.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, for now.
Okay, so yeah, I'm sorry about it. So our initial idea before the proposal about contributing to Kubernetes, contribute kts.io website has shown up. So our initial goal was to have something like that. The designated repo on the CNCF organization on GitHub with that should be like the GitHub pages or something like that. The dedicated website where all people who'd like to contribute to some CNCF projects can find any valuable information for them. I suppose that we can merge our efforts in this area together because Kubernetes is one of the probably the most fast-growing and the most interesting for external contributors project and CNCF together. So yeah. I'm open for discussion.
Yeah, quick question. So it sounds like when you say CNCF, are you planning on doing a community site for all of CNCF for all projects to contribute, or are you thinking like there will be a plan to do individual contributions for Kubernetes and say one for gRPC and one for Linkerd, and like, are you trying to create a community site to rule them all? Is that your scope, or are you trying to create one for each of the products? Oh, hello, Ihor?
Or contributing to containerd, or contributing to Envoy or to any other project. So all these guidelines cannot be simply merged, but having a single place where every person can jump in and take a look. It was our initial idea. As an alternative, we can create like the simple portal with the links to the designated project websites like contribute.cncf.io. May include some link to contribute.kts.io where a person who'd like to contribute to Kubernetes may find some valuable information about how can he contribute to Kubernetes specifically. I hope I'm not frozen again.
Yeah, we lost like half of it. We lost the first half this time instead of the second half.
So okay, so what I'm hearing here is that there's a goal of creating some level of like, hey, you want to contribute to a CNCF project, having some consistency, some ways to get people involved. I think that's an interesting thing. I'm not sure that's something that makes a ton of sense in my mind for Kubernetes specifically. I think the biggest problem we have on the contributor-facing side with Kubernetes is that we have a lot of information spread in a bunch of different places that overlaps in confusing ways. And so, bringing that together, I think would add a lot of value above and beyond sort of the more specialized things like how the heck do we display KEPs?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like KEPs is part of it, and then we also have the how do you contribute, and it's not just Kubernetes, but it's individual SIGs seem to control a lot of that information. So can we create a central meeting point for how to contribute?
Yeah, and we also have a bunch of information in the community repo that nobody finds because Google doesn't index really the pages inside there.
That would be GitHub. I mean, that's the project. What we're describing right now is the exact project that's underway currently. We essentially created one big copy pasta file that's 65 pages long of community content that is contributor relevant from that repo in many different places, and attempting to put all of this content on kubernetes.io as part of the persona that the SIG-Docs is working on for Code Contributor. And it's taken us probably longer than expected time, because we've went down several rabbit holes of multiple docs of the same variety, and which information is accurate and what is out of date. And now we have to come up with also a plan on how we're going to sunset a lot of the information that is in the in the community repo right now. But I think we are at a point now where people can jump in. Like, if people on this call are interested in helping, they can jump into one of the umbrella issues and take a task. But I think, where are we now? We're about 50% done. So we still have a few more weeks to go. We can definitely expedite this with some help, but Gwyn and George and others have been kind of taking task by task on that. But that's essentially where we are right now, is within the next few weeks tops, these docs will live on kubernetes.io. With the help of the docs team and Jennifer, if she can pipe up. She actually hacked up sort of a prototype of what this would entail. Jennifer, are you there, or did I freeze? I could have froze.
No. There's some explaining to do. What I've hacked together is very much a hack, and there's connecting parts that aren't working. But if y'all want to see what this would actually look like hosted on kubernetes.io, I can go ahead and demo. I don't know if, Jared, you wanted to say anything more? Whether show and tell is the point that we're at or not.
I think show and tell seems like a good thing to talk about that. I feel like we all agree in the overall goals of like getting all the contributor material together in one place. Yep. Having a central meeting point for all of it. KEPs being a part of that. I think there's probably going to be some debate over things like access infrastructure, who has the review and then admin rights and things like that. And I'm all for that conversation. So yeah, I think now's a good time to chat through some of that.
So I do want to understand a little bit of, it's like, what is the process here? I feel like the quality bar and the sort of process bar is different for this content than for the main kubernetes.io site. I think we're moving from essentially a free-for-all to something where we're trying to get our arms around it a little bit. I don't want to. Well, I think there's a danger here that we overcorrect, right? That we go too far in the other direction, and all of a sudden, people continue to actually make it a free-for-all because there's so much process involved in terms of actually getting stuff merged to the main site.
Yeah,
I'm not a big fan of like. I agree. I do think there should be a decision-making process, though. I'm pretty ambivalent over like who owns it, but I am a big fan of like we should probably have like we should probably get all the content in one place first.
So I mean, but let me be crystal clear here. I think that the folks who review and approve stuff for the main doc site are stretched pretty thin. I don't want to necessarily have SIG-Docs folks on every PR to the contributor-facing stuff. I just don't think that will necessarily scale.
agreed. So Joe, Andrew,
On that.
Andrew, we all agree. Sorry,
Okay.
Joe, I didn't mean to talk over you.
Thumbs up. Totally agree
Yes.
with your statement. I do not want to own that.
And
I
Andrew
just-
can probably speak best to how we're thinking of doing this. But the idea is to automate includes from other repos, not to require folks to go through the docs review process. And does that make sense? So we would.
Yeah, and the bar's got to be lower there, right? I mean,
No, exactly. I mean, for the contributor guide, that bar gets set by the folks who work on that markdown file in that repo. And then we pull it, we scoop it into the doc site, right? We don't do anything more to it. Once those PRs are merged in the community site, that's over and done with. Ditto the caps.
okay, I just want to make sure, like, as we do things like branching of the site for, for versions, as we're doing a freeze for a version, that's all external facing. Like the contributing docs will continue to evolve separate from that versioning stuff, right? It really is sort of a separate type of thing.
That's right. But we're always publishing the latest to the site. So.
Okay. Now, would those sit in a different GitHub repo then? And then how does that actually get integrated together?
Sorry, say that again.
Okay, so right now everything that is in the main site is in a single repo, right?
Yep.
So are we going to have to put like I'm not going to put caps in that repo. I'll just put it out there, right?
Like Jared said, we agree. We do not want content to live elsewhere than where it lives now. Nobody wants that.
So yeah, Joe, I don't have an answer to your question.
Okay.
We are exploring options for doing it because we have to do it and this is like why there's a bit of nuance in the email and also why I wanted the call. Like, we are figuring this out for the blog already, and there's already work being done to do that. We don't want to own the content, and like I don't want to own that, and I don't want to own the approvals, and Zach totally doesn't want to own the approvals for the blog. It's a different audience, different contributors. This seems to be in a similar vein. It's a similar problem that we're trying to solve. So it would be nice if we came up with a standardized solution for how to do this for all the groups that want to have content on the site, but not go through the SIG-Docs maintainers process that we use for official.
Okay, so let me be clear. I don't care whether the content is on the main Kubernetes site or not. Like, I'm perfectly happy to have community.k8s.io or caps.k8s.io, right? I don't feel like there's a ton of value to having this integrated with the menus and the control flow and everything else that's actually happening on the main kubernetes.io site. Now that's a different set of requirements than the blog, perhaps, right? But for the contributor stuff, like, I mean, we got like dashboard spread hither and yon. It's like we don't lack for random URLs that people have to remember. Having one that actually becomes the meet me point here, I think, is actually a vast improvement, and it doesn't have to be kubernetes.io. Or we could have a link to something that looks different that says, hey, you want to contribute? Here's the contributor guide. and that links to the other site.
But Joe, that's a separate.
Can I chime in for a second?
Where the content lives.
Please do.
Oh yeah, Andrew, please go.
So we've been thinking that like of late that the kubernetes.io site should be somewhat of a portal to make sure like anything you want to find related to Kubernetes, at least you have a touch point there. Whether it's necessarily hosted in the repo, I think is sort of a separate issue. So there's a couple things going on. One is that we've been developing a persona portal. We were going to turn the Docs homepage into a portal, and we have like top level buckets like users that have documentation related to like app developer or whatever, and then we had another bucket which was contributors, which would include Docs contributors like code contributors, ecosystem, whatever, which would fold in some of the stuff that Paris was talking about as well. So we can like link to, even if it's in a different repo, like the key documents that people would need in order to be able to contribute. And then like a third issue, which we've only reached just like since KubeCon been talking about, is all the SIGs have all these different documentation buried with
We are having bad luck on this call. I don't know what's going on. I think everybody's
in their own repo. How do we sort of like surface that and maybe show some of that on the main possibility? Can you?
So I hear what y'all are saying, and I think that makes sense. I think just from a practical point of view, when I ask the question of how are we going to integrate content from a bunch of different repos into a single site, the answer is we don't know. We're still figuring that out. Whereas if I were to ask the question of can we actually use Jekyll plus Netlify to actually publish to community.kubernetes.io and then connect the dots later, like that should be a couple days work to get that scaffolding set up. So I think there's a certain amount of like, do we want to optimize for the perfect solution of having everything on the same site, even if we're pulling from different repos, or do we want to optimize to start making progress in terms of actually getting this stuff indexed up someplace, starting to bring it together? And I definitely lean on the other side. I don't care if it's on the same site, as long as we can start publishing this stuff, as soon as possible.
Yeah, Jennifer?
No, God, we're just sucking on this call. This call is fucking terrible.
I don't know what's going on. So Jennifer, can you hear us? You're muted.
Well, with respect to getting it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious as to like, is there like a massive fire that like, do we need to get this done in the next week? Are there people screaming at us for this to happen? I think that's like, it seems like there's a lot of people working on this. So I want to make sure that if we're going to build something called community, that we actually have community engagement and involvement and agreement on what we're building. Two, that we, I agree with what you're saying, Joe. Like, yes, we could connect the dots later. But if that is the case, then we should definitely build a similar, whatever gets built should be on the same infrastructure that we're using for the site if we're going to duplicate that, because at least then that will make the joining far easier down the road.
Yeah.
But I'll let Jennifer take it away.
Yeah, well, am I muted? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm only on my laptop, and multiple screens and Zoom and screen sharing are just not cooperating. So you can see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So this, Joe and Ihor and whoever else hasn't seen it, is what we have been working on with the Kubernetes Docs user journeys for the last number of months now. Jessica's been part of this small working group. Andrew and a designer from the Linux Foundation have been putting in a ton of time getting this both designed and then developed. We've got a foundational application developer persona. We have a bunch of personas mapped out. And what I'd like to do is take you through what the contributors path would look like. And this is where I need to hack because some of the connective tissue isn't completely wired up in this PR, which should never be merged. But this will show you, you know, we've gone down this path a ways already. It's not like we're starting from scratch. So if you can't land it, this is what you would get as the new landing page for the Kubernetes documentation. It could actually live someplace else too. In fact, yeah, here I can show you, I just went in and hacked the landing page for Kubernetes. This is the community link, right, from the main Kubernetes site. And I just stuck links to the contributor guide and the KEP process here. Just so you could see, there's all kinds of ways we can toss stuff into the site to help people navigate. And I think this should be built properly here. Yeah, this plus, okay, like I said, this is hacky. We don't have the left pane TOC showing here, but what we would get eventually is a better UX for the contributor guide if it gets long, because it will, even though we're trying to compress and condense it. You know, we still need better navigation. So there'll be a TOC like there is on the regular docs pages in the left pane to help people navigate through the contributor guide. This is the work in progress README that Paris has been in charge of, so it's not clearly real content, but this is what the UX of getting to here would look like. So I tossed a bunch of ideas in here for people to look at and think about, right? And then I don't remember what, sorry, forgot to link that one. I linked to it elsewhere. So there is this, and then what you would do is, the idea is, you know, you can decide, okay, what kind of contributor am I? And the code contributor is the one that I worked on here. Whoa, this worked. I could not get this part to build properly. Now, these links are dummy links at this point. They don't work. I didn't set it up properly. But in fact, they're really odd. But the way the overall UX of this redesign of the landing pages works, we provide this, and I picked the Kubernetes API at random as a thing that might not go in the developer guide, that might be something a code contributor would need or be interested in learning about. So that's what that would be like. And you'll notice here, Joe, I've got this link is out to the, well, in what I'll show you next, goes out to the actual documentation, how the KEP works. And then I hacked a list. There isn't actually a list yet. There aren't KEPs living in different SIG directories, so I couldn't really do that. But I could pretend to, right? So that's what that UX would be like. All of the, you know, all of this text is up for grabs. Easy to change. This is just an attempt to show you what it could be like, right? And this is what, if you clicked, I'm not sure where this comes from exactly, from the previous UI, because I had to stick some manual links in this demo. But, you know, here we've got the contributor guide, again, basically the same content. And so again, you know, link out to the contributor guide, keep scrolling down. We can link, you know, read about the API, and this is, I mean, I hacked this stuff. This is not really pulling in from other repos, okay? This is a very, very ugly branch that's going to get deleted very soon. Here we've got the current KEP process documentation. We've got it all in one place, right? And then, you know, this would be a set of includes. You know, we'd have to pull in, and this one I couldn't fix up. I did something weird with the markup, and I just couldn't get to it last night. But that's what the UX, that's one way that we could include the UX of the contributor guide and the KEP process in the model that we have currently been developing and thinking about for contributors within the framework of the larger Kubernetes site. So I'll stop there. And
so I have a question. So Joe, for the community stuff, besides documentation, it sounded like there were other elements, also like a way to actually submit the KEPs and like a way to view like the status of the KEPs in flight. Is that, did I hear that correctly?
I think, you know, So, I mean, any submission of this stuff will still be through GitHub and PRs. That's part of the process. The state of those things will be metadata that's in front matter on those documents, and so it's just a matter of how do we take advantage of that metadata to create a good experience for exploring the KEPs. I think one of the interesting. So there's certain types of I think. As we start thinking about the different mindsets that people will be coming at this, there are going to be folks who are like, how do I contribute to Kubernetes for the first time? How do I discover what I need to do? And I think that this starting at the top of what type of user are you and then navigating people through that makes sense when people are trying to join and get involved for the first time. I think there's another persona, which is like, you know, there's sub-personas here, right? There's the new contributor, and then there's the experienced contributor. And I think we really need to provide, like for the experienced contributor, they want to actually have, like as a contributor, what is my homepage that I go to understand what's happening from the contribution point of view, right? What are the, you know, quick links to all of the various, you know, dashboards that I really need to actually pay attention to, right? What are the what is the milestone? What are we doing with code freeze? What is actually happening over the next week, right? What is the, you know, the list of SIGs, and how do I actually get to that so I know who I talk to about certain things, right? And as we get more and more metadata, you'll be able to navigate from SIGs to all the different code that those SIGs own so that you can actually map back and forth for, hey, this component, this piece of code maps to this SIG, right? Those are the types of things that I think experienced contributors are going to actually care about. And I'm not sure that starting with the kubernetes.io site with this sort of, you know, induction type of sort of wizard approach to figure out what type of user you are is going to work for that more experienced developer. I think this is great for, it's like, hey, you're new to Kubernetes, you want to start contributing. This is exactly what we need. The stuff that I'm thinking about is how do we start adding value for folks who have, you know, a page full of bookmarks that they manage themselves? How do we actually get people to actually have a shared vision of sort of like what the status of the project is? Some of that status of the project is the KEPs, but there's going to be other things that we really want to be able to publish there also. And that stuff's going to be updated all the time. And I think we're going to definitely have, you know, different SIGs are going to have different ways that they want to publish stuff to the rest of the community. So yeah, so I'm not sure that it's, I question whether it's worthwhile to try and cram this community facing, like, you know, what's happening with the project now, which is really a dashboard in some ways, into the information architecture of the documentation side as it exists right now. Because I think this is fundamentally, you're viewing this as a documentation exercise, and I think there's an aspect to the community site which has to be more of like a dashboard of what's happening inside the community. And the KEPs are really back and forth, right? There is a dashboard of like, what are the active KEPs? What is the, you know, what is the current status? Let me sort these things by this. That is in some ways documentation, but in some ways it's a dashboard of like, what are the active things that people are working on across the project? So I'll shut up a little bit. What do you all think about that?
I think if there is more than just documentation, then perhaps it should be a separate site.
Now this stuff, just to be clear, I mean, this stuff will still be, you know, we can probably still do a lot of stuff that's static. We can do stuff with client-side JavaScript, right? There's not going to be, I don't think we're going to necessarily be running a, you know, an active backend against this thing. So utilizing some of the infrastructure like Netlify and Jekyll may still make sense. But I think, you know, trying to actually join it with the experience that Jennifer showed may lead to a frustrating experience for those who are very much involved on a day-to-day basis. Hey, when I wake up in the morning, I want to see what's going on with the project. Where do I go? That seems like that's a different type of site than the documentation site that we've been building up until now. Am I off base here? Because there's a lot of silence here. I don't know if it's a bad connection.
Well, but it sounds like you're talking about sort of, yeah, like a dashboard or like a HUD, but specific to, programmers. So I wouldn't, in terms of naming, I wouldn't necessarily call that just community, because to me, if we did a subdomain that was like community.cates.io, that should include a lot more than just, a dashboard for code contributors that are active every day.
Clear, like the stuff that I'm talking about includes like, hey, the documentation site is like, we're now checking into this branch, and so here's the current process, or we're in this mode as we get down to release, and so here's the information that you need to know about what exactly are the rules for getting code or documentation or whatever in, right? It's very much like I view this as buddy with the community meeting that we have, right? Like we go to the community meeting every Thursday, and we produce notes out of that, but there's a lot of announcements. Well, where would we put those announcements if people wanted to see what is the latest announcement, right? This is the community portal is like the place where we would put this, and it would complement sort of those announcements that happen during the community meeting. So it's different types of community for sure, but I still think it's much more facing the folks who are building Kubernetes versus the folks that are using Kubernetes. And it's not just programmers. I don't want to over-index on that.
What's the objections with redesigning the community tab of kubernetes.io?
I'm fine with that. I think it's just a matter of like, I don't know what. I don't see, I don't know, like, what is it going to take so that, like, how long is it going to take so that, like, we can check something into Kubernetes/community and it shows up here, right? Like, we got to get that process down. And if we start pulling in this content cross repo, Netlify is not supported for that. It's not something that anybody's done yet. It feels like we're borrowing trouble versus just having kubernetes.community.io, community, or whatever name we want to pick, insert site here.kubernetes.io, and then we could have the community tab just redirect to that, right? I mean, like, it doesn't have to be on this site.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 100% in favor of a new community site. I was just under the, not the impression, that's the wrong word. I was just thinking that we could redesign and kick up the community space on Cates.io, but no, I'm actually 100% in agreement with you and what you're saying as to what we need. Like, it would be cool if we could embed the YouTube videos for SIG meetings on the site, so that people could see what we are working on, because I think the SIG videos are kind of the truth of where everyone is and what everyone's doing. So I just don't know myself kind of what goes into the development of that and who would own it and things like that.
I mean, this is contributor experience to some degree in my mind. Like, we did things like we did the SIG.YAML so that we could auto-generate a bunch of the markdown that's on the community site right now. And I think, Caleb disagrees, but I think that was a huge step forward, because now there's a consistent source of truth of like who the SIG leads are, and all the web pages look alike, and we can auto-generate that big table. That's super useful, right? I just want to continue that work, and I think to make the next step, we have to start publishing this stuff outside of GitHub. Now, if there were a proven process to getting it on kubernetes.io, that would be awesome. It doesn't seem like there is.
I was just going to start by filing issues. I'm actually in the middle of filing an issue right now to take the second blank community calendar at the bottom off, until we can figure out what content should actually go into that community calendar. I think we've got some ideas from the contributor experience group, but it doesn't seem like anybody necessarily has the time to do it. But I'm filing that issue today, momentarily. So, I mean, that's just how I was going to start, with just a very simple baby steps of a redesign.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'll give you an example of, like, I don't know, like, we got to start getting a handle of this. I'm looking at the community tab of kubernetes.io, which I guarantee you nobody who's actively working on Kubernetes on a day-to-day basis really looks at, or at least I don't. And there's a link there to list of SIGs that goes to the wiki that nobody's updated in forever. And that thing then, like if you go list of SIGs, then you have to do another link to the actual list that's generated from the SIGs.yaml, right? So there's like 2 levels of indirection there because it's too hard to update. Like we have a wiki, we have markdown spread across all sorts of different repos, and then we have that site itself. I just feel like we got to start getting a handle on this, and I'm not sure if funneling everything through a single repo is going to get us there.
So
I don't think anybody agrees with that. It's just a matter of tactics.
So
is there any opposition to creating a subdomain and spinning up a separate site? Because I think the initial concern when to have this meeting was just to make sure all of our efforts were coordinated. But to that specific point, in terms of Netlify, it's easy. We can just point a subdomain to a repo and a branch, and then it'll host it. That's easy. So is there any objections to spinning up another site under a subdomain of kates.io?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So my objection, I don't know that it's an objection so much as it's just a question. Who undertakes the maintenance and the upkeep of that site? Who undertakes the responsibility of keeping entirely separate tooling chains from developing and increasing the technical debt required to maintain both documentation, community, basically who minimizes technical debt, and who actually undertakes that upkeep, and who commits to doing that on a long-term basis?
While I don't necessarily want to volunteer, I feel like this is something that SIG Experience should own and ultimately be the ones that would be maintaining this. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. But that's just what I feel, from a scope perspective and from a this just makes sense perspective. I think contributor experience who owns this kind of responsibility would be best served.
So is contributor experience also willing to undertake the cooperative maintenance burden?
Yeah, that's what the hesitance is. We have not talked about this at all. So that's why you hear the giggle in my voice of, hey, I think this might be us. But yeah, no, I think we would definitely need to have a larger conversation in our next meeting about this, specifically about the maintenance and who's going to own it. But I can foresee my role and George and a couple other community managers that are on the project full time undertaking this.
And in terms of a totally separate tool chain, I think this doesn't need to be a super fancy site. I mean, it can be ugly. It can be.
I would argue that our current site is quite ugly.
Well, it can be uglier. I mean,
You said it.
I think in terms of a separate tool chain, I'm not religious about the static site generator that we're using. I mean, if it makes sense to say, hey, we're going to use Jekyll across both of these things, seems totally reasonable to me. There is the question with respect to, just sort of closing the loop a little bit towards like what Ihor has been talking about. Do the patterns that we set here actually get imported into other CNCF projects? Is there a way for this stuff to be leveraged, if not directly, but in terms of saying, hey, if you do X, Y, and Z, there's a base of knowledge that you can draw upon, and so you're going to actually have an easier time, right? So if we pick Jekyll plus Netlify, we can crib a bunch of stuff from the main docs repo without having to think too hard. That it's not exactly the same tool chain, but it's at least if we have questions, there's somebody we can ask, right, who might have a clue of having an answer.
Just one note, if we are struggling with designating some kubernetes.io or kts.io space for this effort, we can use cncf.io for this and cncf repos, and everybody who will be working on this stuff and contributing something to this designated repo for this website will be invited to the CNCF organization as a contributor. So it shouldn't be a problem if we are speaking only about domain and website issues. So we can use different spaces to solve this issue.
It's not so much, it is not the domain that is problematic. It is specifically, I'm thinking about the maintenance burden. So I mean, the thing is that if we adopt the static site toolchain that we use to generate kubernetes.io right now, I mean, ultimately, yes, the maintenance burden does fall back on SIG-Docs. Because if that is the basis from which we operate, then the basis of iteration also falls upon us in a consulting role, if not an implementation role. So I guess I don't want to say I am on board with having a community site that actually works and serves relevant content and is sort of is everybody's new bicycle, to make an analogy. One that actually serves content that's relevant to the Kubernetes community. What I don't want to do is say yes too easily to undertaking site development when we're not sure where the long-term arc of maintenance and upkeep falls.
So Zach, when you say long-term maintenance and upkeep, like what exactly are you thinking about there? Because like honestly, if we're talking about the content itself, like we couldn't do any worse than where we're at right now with the sprawl that we have across N different things, right? So that is the core problem that we're facing. Are there other tasks that you think are part of that sort of upkeep that we need to keep in mind?
So 1 year from now, say that it's the most productive holiday break ever, January 1st, 2018, subdomain launches. 1 year from now, who is maintaining that site?
What does maintain mean?
Maintain in this instance means who is handling site performance issues, who is handling reviews, who is handling I'm trying to think of all the pieces that go into the...
I'm just thinking like the review stuff, the content specific stuff, we already have that problem right now with the sprawl that we have, right? And so I don't think, like, and again, some of this is the bar, right? The quality bar for this doesn't have to be as high as the quality bar for our user-facing site. It's a much smaller community. We can definitely lean on individual contributors to actually maintain their own little subsections of this. In terms of like site performance, I think if we keep it simple, it's simple, right? I mean, it's like, it can't be any worse than like how slow GitHub is rendering Markdown, because that's kind of the status quo.
No, but there is a maintenance load. Like to speak to Zach's point, like just for Kubernetes IO, for example, right? Like, we've had to do, like the move to Netlify. We've had to like make sure SEO is working. We've had to like restructure documents. We had to, look into I18N. Like there's a bunch of things that's, keeping up the site or improving it. That's more than just, managing the content on the site. So like
this is, I think those are all examples of things where I think the bar is lower. Like SEO is a nice to have, it's not a must have. If like, let's say we cut the relationship with Netlify, yeah, obviously that'll be work, but that's a project, that's not ongoing maintenance. Internationalization, again, I think, right now we have English docs in GitHub. I just, we can break into that jail later if we want to, but that seems like a separable issue.
Those were just specific points, but the general idea is that, we need basically website engineers that for any sort of, change or feature or something where you're modifying the foundation of the site, you need someone to do that. And the question is, who owns that? Because like I'm on board with Zach in terms of like as SIG-Docs, I don't think we want to own that. Like I'm fine if you want to, have your own site and host it as a subdomain under Kate's.io. That's great. But I don't want to have to necessarily support the maintenance of it long term.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you, and I think channeling Paris here, I'm gonna volunteer her. I think getting contribX to own this, I think makes a ton of sense. I also think that it's going to be an order of magnitude less work than the main site. I don't think the maintenance burden of this site is going to be as high as the main site. And if it turns out that the thing doesn't have any value, we delete it, right? And go back to the mess of Markdown and GitHub that we already have.
So the more I listen to this conversation, the more I understand the argument for a separate site, subdomain, whatever. The kind of concern that Andrew and Zach have expressed over potential SIG-Docs involvement in maintenance, I'm also inclined to agree with for slightly different reasons, because I understand what you're saying, Joe, about a lower bar. But scarcely a week goes by when one of us, almost never me, right? But I watch other people wrangling with crazy build breaks that involve, a check-in that somebody just wasn't quite paying attention to, a commit that, a PR that somebody merged because it seemed perfectly innocuous and only after the fact did all sorts of issues sort of cascade into, oh my God, we can't even publish. This stuff happens with any website. It doesn't matter how low the bar. Just take out SEO, take out internationalization, take out, sort of any of those small, sort of bits and pieces. Anytime you're pushing new content to a website, things will break. And I think, and I'm not saying this is a reason not to do it. I think there is the concern that sooner or later SIG-Docs will get roped into helping troubleshoot these issues. And we'd rather call it out now than down the road. That's all. And that's not an argument against doing it. I'm trying to express in a more general way the concern that's hard to give good examples of right now, because a lot of the stuff that we noodle on a daily basis is this more documentation specific stuff, but some of it's just generic website maintenance.
No, I hear you. I think there is the question of like build breaks and how do you deal with that? I think, so in my mind, I think there's also the question of the tool chain that we pick in some ways defines the people who are going to be managing it, right? So I would be more comfortable personally using something like Hugo instead of Jekyll, because it's Go and there's that skill set is a lot more common across the contributing population here. And so maintenance of that is going to be perhaps easier with that tool chain, but then we won't be able to leverage the knowledge of the docs team. And so I think there's a trade-off there. Now, the other thing is that my guess is that a lot of those build breaks happen when people start changing the underpinnings of the site and the templates and all that stuff.
Not really, honestly.
Really? So like somebody changing a markdown file actually causes the build to break?
Yes, I can point you to one PR from the 1.9 release that looked perfectly innocuous inside of the release mega branch, but that when merged to master, when actually published and merged and published, caused Netlify to fail simply because of the nature of the commit history, rather than rather than any particular change to platform. It was the nature of the commit history and the changes to files involved when replayed upon master created a merge conflict that caused the 1.9 docs to fail to build. So it wasn't a change to the platform, it was an actual change to content.
Okay, but it was a merge conflict as you're doing stuff across branches, was that it?
Yes.
Okay, like we can argue about these specific things, but I don't think we're going to be doing sort of like release branches on this thing, right? So like that particular issue wouldn't hit us.
I think the main point.
I'm just saying, like fundamentally, like it's just going to be a simpler thing. But I totally hear what you're saying. I mean, there is always a chance that this stuff breaks.
I think the main point is just we're saying you need to be clear on who owns it and who is responsible for those activities.
And I think provisionally, according to Paris, that'd be contribX. Provisionally.
Yeah. Yes, I would put it that neither Paris nor I are actually leads on contribX, which is why we're not.
So who's the lead on who's the leads on contribX?
Garrett and Elsie. Garrett Rodriguez and Elsie Phillips.
Okay.
So we will take this up.
If not, then I'm going to say I'll do keps.kubernetes.io and I'll own the damn thing. So I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, I'm happy to help. I'm very happy, and I know Chris on the call and Josh and I know George would be happy to help as well. So I mean, we've got people to do it and to do the work. It's just I think what Docs is saying is that we actually need to step up and promise that we're going to do the work and to pretty much sign our firstborn children to that we're going to do the work and upkeep the work. So,
well, and I think the first question is that as we build this new site, do we build on top of Netlify and Jekyll, or do we do something like GitHub Pages and Hugo, right? Both of those have their pros and cons in terms of what makes sense. And again, obviously if we go with GitHub Pages and Hugo, the Docs team's gonna be like, I don't even know what the hell you guys are talking about, and that is what it is. And maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing.
I was actually going to suggest that using a different tool chain would somewhat prevent Docs from having to get involved unnecessarily, or just through the fact that, oh, this is documentation, is it not, right? A year from now, it kind of prevents the Docs team from owning it, which I think would be beneficial.
And that's why, when the email I said, hey, does it make sense to use the same tool chain or do something that actually is going to be easier to find skills amongst the audience that is going to care the most about those docs?
Yeah. Well, one of the other things that we're going to need to look at is requirements for stuff, because I can definitely see for the KEP requirements to actually say, for example, want some dynamic content as opposed to strictly static content. And if we decide that we want that, then that takes us a completely different direction in terms of toolchain. So I think, any decision on tooling should be based on both spec and a discussion with the whole list of people who are deciding that, who are saying that, yes, I'm going to be participating in this.
So just to be clear, I think, my imagination when I think about the KEP stuff, it's client-side JavaScript with a static server. So I don't think we need to do anything super fancy there, but we can, that's obviously a separable issue. Okay.
All right, so it sounds like we need to have a large conversation with contributor experience, and it sounds like we're ready to proceed with doing a separate site. Is that what I'm hearing?
Provisionally.
No one changed their tone. Okay.
This has been useful. If we do want to, just some quick stuff, if we do want to use Netlify for this stuff, how does that work? Is there a login that we can use? Is it do we have to go through?
Yeah, so
or
I can add you to the Kubernetes organization that I have that's in Netlify. So basically there's a dashboard, and what you can do is create a new Netlify site, add a GitHub repo and a branch, and then it will do a build. And we can we have it set up so that we can automatically assign to a subdomain of kubernetes.io.
Okay.
So we've been doing that for the version docs.
All right, awesome. So that's good to know. And I know, is Tim still the person to talk to about DNS?
Well, he set it up so that we don't have to go through him anymore. In the Netlify site, you can just specify what the subdomain is, and then it will just show up there.
Oh, that's exciting. Okay. Well, very exciting. Okay. Well, we're over time. Thank you, everybody. A lot of interesting conversations going on here. So awesome. And everybody have a good break. Thanks for taking the time.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.